Hello, everyone. Welcome to our last lesson on internet. And next week, I hope I will be in Istanbul and I will be there. So, in the classroom, we will discuss the next lesson in our classroom at Marmara University. As I am as I am outside of Istanbul in Turkey, I couldn't have your midterm exam. I think I will be able to make corrections at next week, so you will have your grades at the end of the next week or at the beginning of the next after. I hope it is okay for you. I hope midterm exam was okay for you also. As you saw, the question is very simple. And I am not expecting you to bring all legal luggage, legal knowledge about the question, of course. But I would like to evaluate your capacity to answer to a legal question in English and in a convenient way. Our lesson today is about unwritten legal norms of international law. Unwritten legal norms means norms that are not in form of treaty, in form of convention. We will talk about norms which are not created by written rule. Of course, even a non-written rule can be written actually. For example, case law, the case law of International Court of Justice is published in books, case law books. But as a convention between jurists, we qualified them unwritten rules. All norms, all legal sources outside of conventional, contractual relations of international subjects, states or international organizations, are considered as unwritten rules. We have three categories of unwritten rules. We have international customs. In Turkish, we call it yapıla geliş. Yapıla geliş. Or we also call it in Turkish teamül. Teamül, very ancient language term. Yapıla geliş is more often used actually in modern times. We have also general principles of international law. General principles of international law which are in majority elaborated by international jurisprudence, by international case law. And the last category of unwritten legal norms are international jurisprudence, doctrine, and equity. We will see that those different categories, legal categories, have their own definition, their own qualification, so they are not confused with each other. Legally, we can make distinctions between them, but don't forget that in practice, those distinctions, those separations between those different unwritten legal norms are not easy to make. Sometimes, at some point, there can be alternative use of terms. So we will see that difficulty. For example, an international custom can also be an international principle. In consequence, it is important to make the difference in a theoretical dimension, but those differences are not always effective. There can be relationships between legal sources of international law. Let's start for the study of the first category, international customs, and then we will study in a second point general principles of international law, and then a last point will be about international jurisprudence, doctrine, and equity. So, first point, international customs. Customs exists in all branch of law, even in internal law, in domestic law. For example, before French Code Civil, French Napoleon Code Civil of 1804, the French law and also other European countries' laws were dominated by customs, customary law. Customary law, all localities had their own customs, their own traditions applied as rule of law. So it is the concept of custom is not specific to international law, but it is very important for the international law because at the very beginning, although there were several international treaties, several conventions on trade, on peace, on war, etc., the international relations were mostly governed by customary rules. Maybe the main example of that is state immunities, diplomatic immunities, and state immunities. Before Geneva Conventions and Vienna Conventions on that, those subjects were governed by international customary law. It is the same for international maritime law, the law of sea, the law of the sea, was originally only customary. The Montego Bay Convention on the law of the sea codified this customary law of the sea. So as you can see, the custom was at ancient times historically very important for the establishment of the international legal order. It's after 18th century, 19th century that we find a lot of treaties, conventions, which are codifying old international customary rules. Montego Bay Convention is the most interesting example of that. The first question about this international custom is the definition, of course. I will discuss with you the legal definition, first of all, and in a second time, I will give you some examples of international customs. So the first time of my reflection will be the legal definition of international customs. A custom is a general practice admitted as a rule of law, admitted as a legal rule. There are two basic elements for that general practice, general behavior to become a custom. The first element is the material element, and the second element is the moral element. According to the material element, behaviors of states or international organizations, behaviors of international subjects of law, international legal subjects, must have a character of generally repeated. They must be generally repeated. So we have three elements on that definition. On that material element, we have three other sub-elements. Behaviors. What means behavior? The second element, the second sub-element is the state or international organization. So the subject of law, the capacity to exist as a subject of international law. And the third sub-element of this material element, which is the general practice, is the character of being generally repeated. The first sub-element, behavior, is can be an action or an abstention. There is no matter, no, it's not mattering. There is no importance to the positive or negative quality of the behavior. The behavior must be an act or an abstention. For example, a decision, a prohibition, an authorization, a declaration, those are acts, those are actions. For the abstention, we can give the example of non-interference in internal affairs of another state. It's an abstention. Non-interference in internal affairs of a foreign state means that a state won't intervene in internal affairs of another state. So it will don't do any act of intervention. The second sub-element is the concept of subject, legal subject of law, international law. Those are states and international organizations. So consequently, we have to exclude NGOs or individuals from those who can create an international custom. The behavior of individuals or the behavior of non-governmental organizations can't create an international custom because they don't have legal capacity in international legal order. They cannot create rights and obligations in international legal order. For example, an individual cannot conclude a treaty. The third sub-elements is that the custom must have the character of generally repeated. The behavior must have the character of generally repeated. It is the consistency of the behavior, the regularity of the behavior, the convergence of the behavior. Each time that a behavior is adopted, it is adopted in approximatively in the same way, in the same sense, with the same effect. Uh, so if there is contrary behaviors, if there are contrary behaviors, those contrary behaviors cannot create a custom. For example, if in a trade matter, for example, international trade, if different states acts in different manner in different times, there can't be a lex mercatoria, a customary law of trade. So the behavior must be unified, uniform, repeated in a unique way. But attention, generally repeated, doesn't mean that there will be only universal customs. There can be local, regional customs. When I say regional in international law, the concept of regional custom is wider than the concept of local custom. For example, regional custom can be a South American custom, and local custom will be, for example, the Amazon area custom, the Amazon River area custom. It will be local. It will be narrower from the regional than the regional custom. So there are three conditions for that material element, three sub-elements. Behaviors can be acts or abstentions. Behaviors can be made by states or international organizations, but not by individuals or international NGOs. And behaviors must be generally repeated, regular, consistent. The second element is the moral element, the psychological element. According to this element, the states must have the belief that this behavior is a result of an international obligation. State, the acting state, must have the belief that his action or his abstention is legally commanded by the international law. It's what jurist calls opinio juris. Opinio juris means the opinion of legal reflection, juris. The legal opinion. The state is acting and it is thinking that this action is legally mandatory. So, because of this opinio juris condition, which is very strict condition, which is very difficult to prove, of course, the concept of custom can be distinguished from other concepts. For example, from the concept of good acting, international good acting, or the concept of international courtesy. International courtesy. International courtesy means uluslararası nezaket. International courtesy or international good acting cannot create a custom because they are not made in the belief that they are mandatory. To give a concrete example, in diplomacy, for example, the diplomatic immunities, although they are today written, were originally customary law. States respects the diplomatic immunity because they believe that it is mandatory. But there is no diplomatic rule, diplomatic customary rule in order to, for example, give privileges to diplomats which are not included in the immunity concept. For example, you give a residence to a diplomat, or you give services to diplomats, specific services to diplomats. Those are not international customary rules. Those are international courtesy rules. For example, you have a passage in airports or other marine ports, for example, you have a passage for diplomatic crew, for example. The existence of this specific service is not a customary rule, it's a courtesy. So this was the first time of my definition of international customs. The second time will be about the first time of the international customs. The second time will be about the examples of international customs. I have two important case law in it before the International Court of Justice. The first is before the Permanent Court of International Justice, the case of 7 September 1927, France against Turkey in Lotus case. Lotus case, there was a collusion between a French boat and Turkish boat, and there were some dead people, and Turkish authority seized the commander of the Lotus in order to pursue him in criminal proceedings in Turkey. And France was requesting to the Permanent Court of International Justice that there was a customary law of international maritime rules, according to which only flag states of the ship can make criminal proceedings against its nationals. So the French commander of the French boat, the boat with French flag, should be judged in France and not in Turkey. And the International Court of Justice ruled that there was no customary rule as that in criminal matters. The foreign state can pursue against criminal acts made against its nationals, because there were some Turkish people dead. So Turkish authority make criminal proceedings against the commander. So as you can see, it's not very easy to realize conditions those two conditions, material and psychological conditions, elements of the international custom. In another example, which shows the difficulty to to discover an international custom is the case of International Court of Justice (ICJ) of 20 February of 1996. This is the continental shelf case, the case of continental shelf of the North Sea. Kıta sahanlığı davası. Kuzey Denizi kıta sahanlığı davası. In that decision, in that case, the International Court of Justice rejected another request about customary law, alleged customary law, which is equidistance principle. Equidistance principle, according to Netherlands and Denmark, which were acting against Germany, equidistance principle should be considered as an international customary maritime rule for the delimitation of maritime borders between states, between continental shelf of states. But the court analyzed this rule of equidistance and it ruled that there was no sufficient proof of that the material elements, neither opinio juris, the psychological element, were realized for this rule of equidistance principle. So there we see two negative examples of customs, and we understand the difficulty of the identification of international customs. But we have, as you know, in other area of international law, a lot of customs. For example, in maritime law, we have customs. In diplomatic matters, we have a lot of customs. And also, of course, in war, in the law of war, international law of war, we have a lot of customs. But today, those different customs are in majority codified by international treaties. At that point, I would like to make a very important remark about the concept of international custom and its codification in international law. In principle, a custom has a wide area of application. It can be applied to all states. It can be opposed to all states. Only if it is universal custom. If it is only regional custom or local custom, it can be opposed only to regional states, to local states. But in principle, a custom can be opposed to everyone. But a treaty, a convention, can be opposed only to parties of this treaty, signatory parties of this treaty, signatory states of this treaty. Only state parties to the treaty are engaged, are obliged by the treaty, not other states. Third states are not engaged by the convention. But what happens if this convention is only codifying a custom, an existing custom. I gave the main example, Montego Bay Convention, the Montego Bay Convention on the law of sea is codifying the custom, the customary international law. And for example, Turkey is not a part of Montego Bay Convention. Neither France, I think, neither United States, maybe. But as it is a codification of customary law, the convention is maybe not formally, but substantially important for third countries. So even though Turkey is not a member of the Montego Bay Convention, the Montego Bay Convention and its application are very important for Turkish Republic because it is those rules are able to constitute or change the international customary law. So I don't want to be so complicated about this relationship between customs and international treaties, but this point is very important, especially for maritime law. So why I am talking about it? My last remark before the second point, general principles of the law, my last remark about international customs will be about the concept of persistent objector. Persistent objector. A state can reject, can refuse an international custom. And it has to do that in order to show its opposition. Otherwise, the behavior can be applied to him. So this is why Turkey, since very early years of the Republic, is denying 6 nautical miles rule of Montego Bay Convention. Especially in Aegean Sea, Turkey is rejecting the extension of the territorial sea from 3 nautical miles to 6 nautical miles by the fact of the Montego Bay Convention. Turkey is a persistent objector of this rule. Otherwise, Turkey should admit the extension of maritime space of Greece in Aegean Sea, which would condemn Turkish ships a very limited area of navigation in Aegean Sea. So let's make a quick stop and before the second point on general principles of law, and I will find you after that in 15 minutes.